She stepped into the chamber, not as a queen, but as a sentence waiting to be carried out. The cold stone floor soaked her footsteps in silence. Outside, the wind scraped against the wooden beams of feathering castle-like nails, dragging across. A coffin. Inside, candles flickered like nervous witnesses. Mary Stuart, once Queen of Scots, once Queen of France, now walked to her death with the grace of a woman who had nothing left to fear. She wore a crimson dress beneath her black cloak, not for vanity, but for vengeance. The color of martyrdom. In the Catholic Church, a silent protest against the Protestant crown that sought to erase her. Her executioners would swing their axes into a living prayer, and every drop that fell would whisper rebellion. They asked her to kneel. She did. They asked her to forgive her killers. She did. She reached beneath her cloak and revealed a silver crucifix, kissing it with cracked lips. The crowd watched as if in a trance, unsure whether they were witnessing justice or sacrilege. The axe rose, then hesitated. The first strike did not end her, nor did the second. It took 3 blows, 3 brutal, wet, bone-cracking strikes to sever the head from the body of a queen. When the head was held aloft, the executioner gripped strands of auburn hair. A slipped. A wig came away in his fist. Her true hair gray, thin, shorn by grief, fell forward, and the crowd gasped, not at the death, but at the truth. Even in dying, she had defied the script, but this was not the end. Not really, because the woman they killed was not just a traitor. She was a claim, a mother, a legend, a threat, and perhaps, most dangerously, she was a mirror, a reflection of every fear Elizabeth I held about power, blood, and womanhood. They did not execute Mary because she ruled poorly. They executed her because she reminded the world that power could bleed, and in the end, it did. This isn't the story of Mary's rise, or even her crimes. It's the story of what frightened the world so deeply they had to slice its throat. It's the story of a queen who carried too many crowns in her bones. It's the story of betrayal, not by enemies, but by blood. A death disguised as law. A silence that echoed through centuries. But to understand why her neck met the blade, we must go back past the crimson dress, past the prison walls, past the prayers. We must return to where it began, to the day she was born into a throne, and the world whispered, "She will not last." She was just 6 days old when she became Queen of Scots. Mary Stuart's crown came before her first breath had even settled into her lungs. Her father, King James V, died of fever shortly after hearing of her birth muttering. It came with, alas, it will go with alas, a prophecy. Or perhaps a curse. Either way, Mary inherited a throne swaddled in silk and soaked in blood. Scotland was no place for an infant monarch, surrounded by warlords, betrayal, and the constant gnaw of English interference. Her guardians feared she would be swallowed whole by politics before she could speak. So they sent her away to France, to a court of perfumes, poets, and poisons. There, she thrived. The French adored her. She danced with the ease of a noblewoman, wrote verse like a philosopher, and carried herself with the poise of a queen twice. Her age, she married Francis, heir to the French throne, and became queen consort of France. For a moment, it seemed she would rule to nation Scotland and France, Catholic jewel in a Protestant world. But that moment dissolved faster than wine on marble. Francis died young, his body as frail as his crown was heavy. Mary, now widowed at 18, was cast back into a world that no longer worshipped her name. She returned to Scotland, older, sadder, and more determined. She brought with her a French elegance the Scots did not trust. They wanted a warrior. She offered poetry still. She ruled. She rode through the Highlands with regal fire. She tried to bridge the gap between Catholic and Protestant, reform and tradition. She surrounded herself with men who claimed loyalty but sharpened knives behind their backs. Yet, in court, she was radiant. Her beauty was legend. Her signature, looping, deliberate scrawl was feared on every decree. But beneath the velvet, something rattled, something frail. Mary was not naive, but she was vulnerable. The French court had taught her grandeur. Scotland required grit. And the English, watching always, whispering constantly, saw her not as a queen, but as a rival, especially one woman in England, one with flame-colored hair, cousin, a mirror. Elizabeth. Their bloodline connected them. Their thrones divided them. And the closer Mary rose to power, the more Elizabeth felt her own crown tremble. Still, God. In the early years, Mary stood tall, anointed by God, adored by many. God, encloaked in a majesty few could match. But crowns, as history shows, are not kept. They are borrowed, and Mary was about to learn what it meant to rule in a land that saw loyalty as currency, and betrayal as routine. It began, as most tragedies do, with a choice disguised as love. Mary's second marriage was not to a foreign prince or a noble ally, but to Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. Tall, handsome, and of royal blood, Darnley seemed, on paper, a perfect match. Their union would unite claims to the English throne, strengthen Catholic lines, Scot, and silence whispers of Mary's vulnerability. But paper burns easily. Darnley was charming, yes, but also arrogant, unstable, and desperate for power. He wanted to rule beside Mary, not as consort, but as king in name and force. And when she refused to grant him that authority, his love turned to resentment. His kisses curdled. His praise became poison. He drank, he raged. He betted her ladies-in-waiting. He humiliated her in public, and yet Mary endured, perhaps for the sake of peace, perhaps for the sake of her unborn child, oh, perhaps because she believed, still, in the mask he wore. But masks slip. In 1566, while Mary was 6 months pregnant, Darnley stormed into her private chambers with a group of armed men. Before her eyes, they stabbed her friend and secretary, David Rizzio, over 50 times on the floor beside her. His blood soaked her skirts. Screams echoed through the palace halls. Mary never forgot that night, nor did she forgive it. Her son, James, was born soon after. But the birth did not save the marriage. Darnley became more erratic, more hated, more expendable. And then, he died. A house explosion. His body found in the garden. But he had not been burned. He had been strangled, murdered in cold blood. And though no one could prove who gave the order, many eyes turned to Mary, or worse, her new protector, James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, a man as brutal as he was bold. He led the investigation into Darnley's death. He declared himself innocent, and weeks later, he married Mary. Some said she loved him. Others said he kidnapped her, raped her, and forced the union. Silence on the matter remains one of history's darkest voids. But what followed was chaos. The Scottish nobility turned. The public recoiled. Elizabeth sharpened her quill. Mary had gone from widowed queen to accused accomplice, from mother of a future king to woman in disgrace. Her allies faded. Her enemies closed in, and the world that once bowed now questioned if she was queen or traitor. Once draped in velvet and crowned with lilies, Mary now rode a horse through Scotland's wind-swept moors, captive, filthy, and alone. Her crown hadn't been taken. It had evaporated. After the scandal of her marriage to Bothwell, Mary was forced to abdicate. Her infant son, James, was seized and declared king. Her power didn't just slip, it shattered. Bothwell fled into exile. Mary was imprisoned in Lochleven Castle, a fortress surrounded by water and silence. No royal court. No allies. Just stone walls, cold winds, and the weight of abandonment. She miscarried twins there, She tried to bargain, to write, to pray, but Scotland had turned. Nobles who once toasted her name now sent spies. Even her half-brother stood against her. Still, she did not surrender completely. In 1568, she escaped. Disguised, desperate, she rallied a small force and tried to reclaim her throne. But her army faltered at Langside. Her dream of returning as queen ended in smoke and mud, so she fled not north, but south, to England, to her cousin, to Queen Elizabeth. She crossed the border not as a monarch, but as a refugee, and in doing so, she walked willingly into a gilded cage. Elizabeth did not greet her. There were no parades, no sisterly reunion, only suspicion. Mary had a claim to the English throne. Mary was Catholic, Mary was dangerous, and Elizabeth cautious. Calculating knew that a dethroned queen could become a banner for rebellion. So she kept Mary under house arrest, not a dungeon, but not freedom either. Castles, estates, always watched, always moved. Mary lived like a relic, beautiful, useless, and slowly fading. From Loch Leven to Carlisle, Sheffield to Flickering, she was passed like a secret, too risky to destroy, but too dangerous to release. For 19 years, she waited. She wrote letters, pleading, plotting, remembering. She embroidered, she prayed, she aged, and all the while whispers grew that she still had supporters, that she longed for a Catholic uprising. She wasn't just a prisoner, she was a spark waiting to fall on dry tinder, until one day, she lit the match. They expected her to rot in silence, to fade gently like a wilting rose pressed between the pages of forgotten history. But Mary Stuart did not go quietly. She endured, even as her body began to betray her. Years of confinement aged her faster than time should allow. The woman who once danced through French ballrooms now limped through damp English corridors. Her once famous beauty, porcelain skin, auburn hair, violet eyes gave way to rheumatism, toothache, fatigue, the cold stone floors, the endless drafts. The heavy gowns which once stole a piece of her youth, and yet she held onto dignity like a final jewel. She remained regal in decay, always dressed, always composed, even as the pain grew sharper, more insistent. Her legs swelled, her eyesight blurred. Her hands, once skilled in embroidery, began to shake. Some say she suffered from arthritis, others whisper cancer. Whatever it was crawled through her body with royal permission. It did not rush. It simply claimed her inch by inch. But the worst wound wasn't physical. It was the letter she never received in 1586. She was implicated in the Babington plot, a Catholic conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary on the throne. Lighters were intercepted, secrets exposed, evidence forged or relit no longer mattered. Elizabeth's council had what they needed. They charged Mary with treason, a queen accused like a common traitor, a foreign monarch tried under English law. She stood before her judges, not as a sovereign, but as a woman already sentenced by history. She denied the charges, defended herself with intelligence and fire. "I am the Queen of Scots," she said, not a subject of England, but her body. Her body knew. Her execution was no longer a question. It was a date waiting to be written. She was moved to Flickering Castle, surrounded by guards, stripped of privacy. Even her rosary was taken. Her beloved dog hid beneath her skirts, trembling, and there she waited again. Every morning she woke with the same question: "Is today the day they kill me?" When the answer finally came, she did not flinch. She chose her own clothes, a crimson petticoat, the color of Catholic martyrdom, beneath a black gown. Her final outfit was not for comfort, it was for message. Her body might have broken, but her image would not. The hall was cold, not in temperature, but in soul. It was February 8th, 1587, at Flickering Castle. Dawn had not yet broken when the executioners prepared the scaffold. Wooden, narrow, draped in black. A block stood in the center, sided. A long axe, polished, waiting. The Queen of Scots walked in with a calmness that unsettled even her enemies. She held a crucifix in her hands, a Bible in her arms, dressed in a black gown, a white veil, and beneath it all a blood-red petticoat. She had chosen her death as a final performance, a queen until the last moment. She smiled, not because she was unafraid, but because she refused to let them see fear. Witnesses said her face glowed, that her voice did not tremble, that she forgave the executioner before he raised the axe, and then she knelt. She laid her head upon the block herself. No one forced her. She whispered prayers in Latin. Her lips moved steadily, and then silence. The axe came down, but it did not kill her. The first blow missed the neck entirely and struck the back of her head. A gasp erupted from the crowd. Blood spurted. Her body recoiled, but she did not scream. The second blow landed true, but not clean. It took the third swing to sever the head, and even then, when the executioner held up her severed head and cried, "God saved the Queen," her hair came away in his hand. It had been a wig. Her real hair, gray and thinning, clung to the bloody neck, still resting on the block. The hall went quiet, not from reverence, from shock. This wasn't just an execution, it was a desecration. And as her little dog ran onto the scaffold and curled beside her decapitated body, licking the blood that pooled at her feet, even the hardest men turned away. There was no triumph, only horror, only silence, only the question, what have we done? When the blade had cooled and the blood had dried, came a silence deeper than mourning. It was fear. Elizabeth I had signed the death warrant. When word reached her that Mary was dead, she claimed it was a mistake. She wept. She raged at her council. She accused her advisors of rushing her hand. But her grief wasn't just for Mary. It was for what her death unleashed. Mary had been a Catholic queen. Her execution lit a fire across Europe. Spain, already on edge with England's Protestant rule, took it as a declaration of war. Within a year, the Spanish Armada would rise, not just to conquer, but to avenge a queen's blood. Rome called it martyrdom. Pamphlets were printed, paintings commissioned. In Catholic countries, Mary wasn't dead. She was canonized. But in England, her body was hidden, buried without fanfare. Her name spoken in hushed tones. Her image erased from tapestries. Her story reshaped to serve the crown. They said she was dangerous, a seductress, conspirator, but they could never deny this. She died with more dignity than she had ever been shown in life. And still, rumors persisted. Some whispered that her heart had been removed before burial and kept as a relic, that her final breath had cursed the House of Tudor, that the red of her petticoat stained the scaffold forever. Elizabeth, despite her victory, grew more reclusive after Mary's death. She never married, never named a successor. Some say she feared the crown itself had been tainted by blood, and that every monarch who followed would carry that stain. The crowd who watched Mary's execution never forgot it. Many wrote of how their hands shook afterward, how the wind seemed colder that day, how they went home. They couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, because they had seen not just a queen die, but something deeper, a mirror of justice turned backward, a crown that devoured its own, a woman condemned not for her crimes, but for who she dared to be. History claims she died that morning in 1587, but Mary, Queen of Scots, never truly left in the minds of kings, in the margins of royal letters. Her name remained a quiet warning, a symbol of what happens when power fears beauty, intelligence, and bloodlines. She became a myth, a martyr, a ghost that rattled through the corridors of European courts. In France, they remembered her as the elegant Dauphine, young, poised, tragic. In Scotland, opinions split. Some called her a victim, others a fool who let love drown her rule. But even her enemies admitted she had presence, charisma, and an unshakable belief in her divine right. Her son, James VI of Scotland, inherited her crown, and later, England's as James I. The irony: Mary had died for a throne he would inherit without spilling a drop of blood. He never spoke much of her, but he moved her body in 1612. Her remains were reinterred at Westminster Abbey, just a few feet from Elizabeth I, the woman who signed her death warrant to rival queens. Two blood-soaked legacies, buried side by side. It was as if history itself couldn't decide who had won. Over the centuries, Mary's image shifted. Victorians painted her as the wronged woman. Filmmakers recast her as a romantic heroine. Feminists found in her a symbol of how the world punishes women who defy roles, who rule, love, sin, and speak. But underneath every retelling lies a deeper truth. She was never allowed to be just human. She was a threat to Protestantism, to patriarchy, to politics. Her death wasn't just an ending, it was a message, that no matter how royal your blood, no matter how sacred your claim, the crown will protect itself, even if it has to kill its own. And yet, she lingers in portraits, with defiant eyes, in letters signed with trembling hands, in the silence between two tombs in Westminster, where visitors feel a chill without knowing why. Not a ghost of vengeance, but of memory, of injustice, of the woman who wore red to her execution and left a stain no monarch could wash away. Centuries later, in the dust of royal archives, in the private vaults of noble houses, something curious kept surfacing: letters, fragments, diary entries, testimonies smuggled across borders, not written by queens or kings, but by handmaidens, guards, jailers, spies, the ones who watched Mary die. One spoke of how she whispered prayers in French before the axe fell, not in fear, but in rhythm, as if guiding her own soul toward peace. Another, hidden in a drawer at Hatfield House, mentioned how her executioner trembled, that the first blow missed her neck, hitting the back of her head. She groaned that it took 3 strikes to sever her head, and when he held it up by the hair, the head fell, the wig came off, revealing short, graying curls soaked in blood. A witness fainted. A dog, her small spaniel, ran from beneath her skirts and refused to leave the blood-soaked stage. None of this made the official record, but in private scribbles, these details reappeared again and again, as if truth, no matter how buried, refused to stay dead. Some letters hinted at darker plots, that Mary's death was meant to send a message to foreign powers. Elizabeth signed the warrant reluctantly, but allowed it to move forward without stopping it. That her ministers burned evidence, silenced messengers, rewrote events. Even Elizabeth, days after the execution, locked herself in her chambers and wept. Or so they say. Was it guilt or performance? We'll never know, but Mary's own letters survived too, some written in cipher, some in code. She wrote a betrayal, of hope, of her son. She prayed for mercy, but expected none. She signed her final letter to Henry III of France like this: "From your most loving sister and cousin." The unfortunate and much wronged Mary, Queen of Scots. Even as she faced death, she held to her identity: queen, wronged, unbowed. These fragments tell a story beyond the official one of censorship, propaganda, and silent resistance, of the many hands who tried to erase her, and the few who couldn't forget, because history is not what survives, it's what we choose to. Remember, she never watched the axe fall. She never touched the blood. But her name, Elizabeth, was carved into the outcome. The Queen of England had always been a master of duality. The Virgin Queen who flirted with kings. The symbol of Protestant strength who kept Catholic advisors. The monarch who claimed mercy, but ruled through fear. And when Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed, Elizabeth wore a mask. She claimed she had not meant for it to happen so soon, that the warrant had been dispatched without her final blessing, that her secretary, Davison, was at fault. She imprisoned him for months, but no one believed it. This was not an impulsive woman. This was a strategist, a queen who held power through precise control. The truth was simpler and darker. Elizabeth needed Mary gone. Mary was a threat to the crown, a Catholic icon, a beacon for rebellion. But Elizabeth also feared becoming a martyr maker. She did not want the guilt or the legend that Mary's death would birth. So she played a silent war. She delayed. She hesitated. She allowed the machinery of execution to move forward while stepping carefully aside, letting others bear the stain. She didn't watch, but she did not stop it. And when news arrived that Mary was dead, the axe stained. The prayers ended. The prayers ended. The body lifeless, Elizabeth wept. Her court was stunned. Was it sorrow or strategy? She wore black. She secluded herself. She denied involvement and let the world whisper. But Mary's blood was on her reign. Some say Elizabeth was haunted by it, that her dreams turned feverish, that she spoke Mary's name in the dead of night, that she feared judgment, not just from her people, but from God. She had one. She had survived, but in the mirror of history, Mary stood behind her, silent, decapitated, and unforgettable. And Elizabeth, for all her brilliance, could never escape the truth. To rule as a woman in a world of daggers, she had to become colder than any king. She never watched the axe fall. She never touched the blood. But her name, Elizabeth, was carved into the outcome. The Queen of England had always been a master of duality. The Virgin Queen who flirted with kings. Symbol of Protestant strength who kept Catholic advisors. The monarch who claimed mercy, but ruled through fear. And when Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed, Elizabeth wore a mask. She claimed she had not meant for it to happen so soon, that the warrant had been dispatched without her final blessing, that her secretary, Davison, was at fault. She imprisoned him for months, but no one believed it. This was not an impulsive woman. This was a strategist, a queen who held power through precise control. The truth was simpler and darker. Elizabeth needed Mary gone. Mary was a threat to the crown, a Catholic icon, a beacon for rebellion. But Elizabeth also feared becoming a martyr maker. She did not want the guilt or the legend that Mary's death would birth. So she played a silent war. She delayed. She hesitated. She allowed the machinery of execution to move forward while stepping carefully aside, letting others bear the stain. She didn't watch, but she did not stop it. And when news arrived that Mary was dead, the axe stained. The prayers ended. The body, lifeless Elizabeth, wept. Her court was stunned. Was it sorrow or strategy? She wore black. She secluded herself. She denied involvement and let the world whisper. But Mary's blood was on her reign. Some say Elizabeth was haunted by it, that her dreams turned feverish, that she spoke Mary's name in the dead of night, that she feared judgment, not just from her people, but from God. She had one. She had survived, but in the mirror of history, Mary stood behind her, silent, decapitated, and unforgettable. And Elizabeth, for all her brilliance, could never escape the truth. To rule as a woman in a world of daggers, she had to become colder than any king. Mary died with dignity, but not peace. And centuries later, her execution still whispers a truth we struggle to face. That justice, when tangled in fear and ambition, ceases to be justice at all. She was called a seductress, a traitor, a reckless queen, but beneath the titles, beneath the politics, she was a woman, mother, a prisoner, stripped of her throne, her voice, and finally, her life. Elizabeth I signed her cousin's death warrant with shaking hands, not because Mary was guilty, but because her existence threatened a fragile order. A single royal heartbeat stood between the Protestant future and a Catholic past, and so they ended it, not with clarity, but with caution, disguised as righteousness. And that is the horror that lingers, not just the execution, but the reasons behind it. Power dressed as virtue, fear posing as justice. The execution of Mary Queen of Scots was not a moment of clarity. It was a mirror that reflects every era where power silences dissent, where justice is sacrificed for convenience, where women are punished not for what they do, but for what they represent. Mary's story is not just about thrones and swords. It's about how easily truth is buried beneath politics, how a crown can become a noose, how history remembers the victors and forgets the condemned. But not this time, because in every whispered prayer, every retelling, every portrait that outlived the scaffold, Mary rises again, not as a flawless queen, not as a helpless victim, but as a reminder that the world does not always punish the guilty, that being inconvenient can be fatal, and that history, no matter how bloodied, will always whisper back.